well, I'll just give a quick intro. Steve Grambow is in our department here, biostat department, and a lot of his work is teaching, education development. He teaches in the CRTP program, Clinical Research Training Program, and that is educating mostly physicians, I believe, not research. So he's a really good teacher, and you do some collaborative as well. Right?
Yeah, I do. Most of my collaborative work has been behavioral intervention trials in kind of lifestyle modification for chronic diseases.
Okay. So that's a short intro, and an expert on giving presentations. So we thought this would be helpful for preparing for your presentation this summer. And also, did you stream the faculty talk last week?
So good.
Yeah. Okay. So just think about that faculty talk as he walks through these things and how he was such an effective presenter. So I think that's like a really good example of a very effective experience presentation. And of course, he wasn't presenting like on one particular project like he will be, but just think about some of the concepts from this presentation.
Yeah. So you guys saw that talk. That was so good. I mean, and one of the things that I'll talk about is that I think that's the way talks should be given, is that you're telling a story, right? So he was telling this really incredible, compelling story, and he's so skilled at just hitting the right points and the pacing of what he did. I just thought it was a fantastic talk. And so the generation of this talk dates back to somewhere in 2005 or somewhere thereabouts. Kevin, who is a colleague, we've worked together many years, we were sitting at the Mad Hatter lamenting how bad scientific presentations are at conferences. Now, have you guys ever been to like the joint statistical meetings? Have any of you been to the annual
or any big conference?
Any big scientific conference? What was your experience? I mean, were the presentations good?
Some are good.
Some are good? Not everybody's Fauci though, right? Turn this off. But were there any particular things you noticed about presentations at the conferences that really were not good, that really bothered you? Yeah.
I took a class in undergrad.
Yeah.
That was like how to give a good speech or presentation. And one of the main things was like trying to get away from just putting a bunch of text.
A bunch of bullet points on
and bullet points and just like reading word for word. And it just surprises me, I guess, that like still at big conferences, like a lot of the slides are really cluttered with tons of text and they're just like reading off of it. And it's kind of hard to, or just like text over the slides.
Excellent observation. Anything else?
Most of them don't really tell a story. They're just kind of like boring information.
Boring information, absolutely. And the thing is, I mean, hopefully, whatever project you're working on, I mean, it's really complicated, but really compelling and interesting stuff. And I think, the problem is that we take this very formulaic approach at times to presenting, right? It's like, here's the research question, here are the methods, here are the results, and don't infuse our presentations with like the passion and the real motivation for why we're doing what we're doing. I think that's really key, and particularly given the Fauci talk, that's what it can be. It can be really compelling. And so Kevin and I were sitting around going, and so I've gone to the joint statistical meetings for many years, and it's a great experience for networking, for giving talks, but I started only going, and this is a known problem, that a lot of the presentations just aren't very good. And so you do things like only go to invited talks, right? Not contributed talks, because the invited talks are usually more senior people, they put more time. And, but so this presentation, we've been giving versions of this talk for many years. We've given this talk at Duke, at other local institutions. We've given it in Indiana, Puerto Rico, Beijing. And so this ridiculous conversation we had complaining about the quality of presentations turned into something that really resonated with a lot of people over the years. And one of the things that's really interesting that you mentioned, when we were in Puerto Rico giving this at a faculty development talk, all the senior people in the room, when we brought up this question, like how much time should you put into preparing a talk? You know, people said, oh, you know, an hour, a couple hours, and all the senior people in the room were just shaking their heads like, no, like this great talks, like you can, there are scientific talks, there are talks for job talks. Some of these talks, I think have unexpected benefit or consequences when you give a really compelling talk, that can, and also like I'm being recorded now apparently, right? So these people can see it later. So these really potentially can have real impact on your career. So anyhow, let me start. So that's Kevin. Usually this is a black tie affair, so we're just doing it casual today. And this work was supported by the Duke Clinical and Translational Science Institute and the CTSA grant, which is a large infrastructure grant here at Duke. And so this, right, this is, and actually the interesting thing is talks have become much more complicated because this is what talks used to be like prior to the pandemic. You never did talks, right? Very rarely. And so this is, when we started this talk, this was the reality is you're going to be on a stage of some kind or in front of a live group of people, right? And now this is an added component. Like a lot of talks happen online, on Zoom. And the thing is, from a presentation perspective, these different formats of giving talks have different requirements for, I mean, there's a lot of overlap, but there are different requirements for in-person versus virtual talks. And so, so 4 components I want to touch on today. One is deciding on your scientific story, right? And the notion of that you should tell a story, a compelling story if you can. Then, of course, getting to what you were talking about, creating effective slides. And very important, particularly for quantitative scientists, is how you present data. And we'll talk a little bit about just a few concepts of how to really engage people when you're presenting data, because you don't want it to be too cluttered or overwhelming. And then last are just some tips on giving presentations of being in front of a group of people or online. And so the first thing, let's talk about deciding on your scientific story, right? And so there are 3 key questions to think about for selecting a story to tell, right? One is, who is it that you're talking to? That's really important to understand is who the audience is, what their characteristics are, what are they interested in, right? What is their scientific sophistication, right? How much do they understand about what you're going to be talking about? The other, of course, is how much time do I have for my talk? One of the worst things that happens at conferences is people have way too many slides and they can't get through them, or they start speeding through them because they haven't practiced enough to know that they have a presentation that's far too long. And then the third, which I think is really one of the most important, is what is the point, right? Realistically, where can I bring this audience by the end of my 10-minute talk? And so specifically, what are the 3 to 5 key takeaways that you want the audience to leave with, right? So for an impactful talk, I think what we want to have happen is we want people to leave our talk thinking about those key messages. And what would be really great, particularly if they're at a conference, if they go and they say to somebody, man, I was at this really great talk and they talked about this, right? Rather than them leaving your session because it's like, this is awful. Maybe there's another session I can go to, right? But so it's really important, I think, to identify what are the key takeaways that you want your audience to leave with when your talk is finished, right? And so if we can identify those key messages, right, then we design our talk to be sure that those are the messages that we get conveyed to the audience and that they can lead with, right? And so when we've identified those messages, then we can start to build the story around them. And one of the things to think about is it's really important to decide what is relevant to the story. I have a really bad habit of digressing, going off topic. And when you're in a limited time situation, it's really important to select the components that are really essential for telling your story, right? And so you really want to include only what is needed to make your key points that you've identified. And so this is the question we always get when we get this presentation: how many slides should I have? And for us, this is the wrong question to ask. This is not the approach that you should take. The question should be, what story can I tell effectively within the allotted time? And what visual supports are needed on slides to help me tell that story? Right? I mean, what we all, I think, end up doing is we open up PowerPoint or Google Slides, Keynote, or whatever it is, and we start putting slides together before we've identified what the key messages are, right? Before we've refined the story. And when you do that, you usually end up with a disconnected story and too many slides. I mean, that's the risk, but it's what we all do. And the other thing that happens, speaking of digressing, is that when you start with slides, then you start thinking about, well, what font should I use? What pictures should I put? And so you get into a whole bunch of details before you've even figured out what the story is that you want to tell. And for a period of time, we offered individual consultation on slides, and we saw this over and over again. Is people would throw slides together and then try to figure out what they're going to do. The problem is that just leads to kind of chaos, right? I mean, it can't work, but there's some risk associated with that you're going to get more things into your presentation than need to be there. And so, and in terms of what those key messages are, they should, hopefully be related to results that were unexpected. Maybe the data shows that the hypothesis is correct, but so it's finding those things that are important. I mean, and also, if an intervention or something doesn't work, that can also be really interesting, but it's finding those key points and then figuring out how to tell that story. And so moving on to, you've got a story and now you're trying to create effective slides. So this is a typical meeting room, at least at the joint statistical meetings. They're in hotels. They usually are open, right? So they have these long, narrow conference rooms with a screen set up in the corner that's insufficiently sized for the depth of the room, right? And so Kevin likes to take these. This is a picture. Kevin always takes pictures at conferences. But you can see. I cannot see what's on the screen. That's just right. And so you want to be prepared and defensive for creating slides. It depends. Like when you're going to conferences, you just have no idea what the situation is going to be. So you want to be prepared and make sure your slides will play well in any venue. So that's something to think about. And that used to be the most challenging situation. Now, the other thing, of course, is you may have somebody on an iPad sitting on their couch if you're presenting on Zoom or on Teams or some other virtual platform. Right, and so here, let's just cover a few techniques. Every pixel counts, keep it moving, and use large enough font. So let's start with the pixel count. So folks know who Edward Tufte is. He's a statistician, and he's really famous for a series of books on data visualization. He's got a series of books and talks about how to make good visualizations. And just kind of paraphrasing one of his principles, he says that every pixel requires cognitive effort to process. So when you show somebody a table or a figure or something, they have to process that cognitively, right? And because of that, when you're giving a short scientific presentation, every pixel on the slide should be helpful for understanding the story that you're telling. You should not have extraneous pixels. And so, for example, right, if you look at these really fancy slide templates that you can find in our software, some of them look really cool, but you may want to avoid unnecessarily flashy or extravagant slide sets, because they and in the longer version of this presentation, I go through some examples that are quite funny, right? But so you want to make sure that your slides don't have distracting pixels. The other thing is what you talked about, right? Here's a very typical slide, right? Where this is what we do when we don't know our talk well. And so those are our speaking notes, right? Because you can just stand in front of the audience and we'll just read the slide together, right? Which is really not particularly effective. And so one thing you can do with a slide like this, right? And so this is talking about patient-reported outcomes and instruments and what the characteristics of some of these patient-reported outcomes are. So what we could do, there's just too many pixels on this slide. So there's a really simple way to fix this. Just take some of the words out, right? Because the goal is not to have the audience read your slide. The goal is for the slide to support the story that you're telling to the audience. So I'm talking to you, that's supposed to support. It's not supposed to be a book that you read while I talk on incessantly, right? It's supposed to be coordinated. And then the other thing you can do is you can put some kind of visual support on the slide that, right, here's some problems, right? This communicates information to the audience. And then, right, so if we start with this, then we can, one at a time, display these things, talk about them while we're doing it, right? And this is a much more kind of humane and easy to process cognitively slide for somebody. Right? So a very simple way to just take a text-heavy slide and make it a little more engaging and a little easier to process for the audience and to support the story I'm telling. Right? And so those are some simple techniques. Now the other thing that happens in the virtual environments, right, is this is the situation we have now, right? And hopefully a lot of the engagement is coming from the fact that I'm looking at you, I'm in front of you, that there's a relationship between me and what I'm saying and people, and I'm making eye contact, right? And in this situation, the slides are the support for me standing in front of the room. But what's happened is, right, and so it's that connection between me and the audience is really important. But this is what happens when you go online. Now you see me as a little head on the top corner of the screen, and the things that now become really important are what I'm showing you, right, and the audio, because that is the way that you're hearing what I'm saying, right? And so if you have really terrible microphone, then that affects the quality of the presentation. And so this is a slide I showed earlier, right? And like, who's my audience? How much time do I have? Right? And so this is a very static approach to the slide. I showed you all 3 points at the same time, and I've got a static image on it, as opposed to what I actually did, right, earlier, was I had a little bit of movement on the slide. I changed, for each bullet point, I changed the image, right? And that just keeps things moving. It keeps things engaging so that if I'm just droning on to a static slide, that actually can affect people's engagement and people's interest in what I'm doing. And then the last one, some selections. Anybody know where this text is from? Can anybody recognize these lyrics? Good guess. This is a Prince song. Does So when Kevin and I first met, we identified that we had a mutual appreciation. But anyhow, 60 point is a really good guide in terms of being able to see fonts, right, on screen. And it's not a perfect rule, but it's not a bad rule that you just want to be defensive in making sure your fonts are large enough so that if you're in a large venue, folks can see what's going on. So that's two parts: picking your scientific story, figuring out how to tell it, and then creating effective slides to support that story. Any comments or questions about that? Yeah.
And with an image, we pick unless fidelity.
Yes.
So then if I put it in the slide, I would have not a lot of space for it for to describe.
Yeah.
So in that case, should I just cut pictures into small pictures, or should I just put the picture there and then I'll be the one to describe?
That is a fantastic question, and I'll ask you to just hold on for a minute because I'm going to give an example I think that will address that, and I'll point it out when I do. But that's an excellent question. You know, because if you think about it, some of the science is really pretty complicated, right? And some of the imagery and the visualizations are fairly complex. And you know, it's one thing to be looking at an image in a paper when you're sitting with a latte and you're looking at a paper and you can kind of figure it out. It's another when you're in a time-limited circumstance presenting to people that you really don't want to overwhelm the audience. So when I was working on my PhD, my advisor told me, you can only lose the audience in the last 5 minutes of your presentation. So up to a 45-minute presentation, they have to stay with you for 40 minutes, and then you wow them in the last 5 with like equations or whatever. But you can only lose them at the end. If you lose them 5 minutes in, you completely failed, right? And so that was a rule that I thought that I've carried with me, that you don't want to lose your audience until the end of the presentation if you're trying to impress anybody with your research. But so that's a really important point. Other comments or questions? All right. So, you know, if you think about scientific presentations, the data and the results, like that's what everybody's there for. You may have really interesting research questions, but the thing is, what does the data say? What are the results, right? And so the problem with this in a short scientific presentation is that, as you guys know, you can have like literally hundreds of thousands of pages of statistical output. And figuring out, right, like what 2 or 3 visualizations are you going to show to communicate what your project showed to your audience is really non-trivial. And if you don't select well, you may show something like this, right, which is like way too much, unintelligible for the most part. This is taken from an actual presentation, right? That's not an easily digested visualization. And so just a couple of principles for kind of engaging your audience when you're giving, when you're presenting data. And so one is, show them only what's necessary for your story, right? So make sure it's really focused on those key messages in the story you're telling. 2, and this goes to your question, if you're going to show them something that's complicated, prepare them. I'm going to show you something that's complicated, right? I mean, tell them. And then reveal that data in layers to support your story. So orient them to the things you're showing to them and dole it out to them in pieces so that they don't really struggle, right, with trying to understand that. Because what happens in general, right, we all have a phone. So one of 2 things will happen, right? So let me go forward a little bit, and then I'll, right? So here's a typical table. This is just a screenshot from a manuscript. This has to do with kind of survey responses from patients, right? There's a whole bunch of data on here. And so the thing that's important to note is that, like I said earlier, if you're sitting reading a paper, right? Your, prior literature that's relevant to your project. You're trying to understand what's in that table. You can look at the text, look at the table, take a sip of your coffee, right? It's a very relaxed thing, and you can really take time to process this. But if you're in a scientific presentation, it's a totally different context than reading the article, right? You really have to be focused and only focus on the things that are important. Because what happens if you show people too much, they're either going to stop listening to you and try and figure out what's on your screen, or they're just going to pick up their phone and start checking their mail or texting people, right? That's what happens in scientific presentations. So you don't want to lose them to either of those things. You want them to stay with you. And so this is something that we see in a lot of presentations. And what people sometimes do to make this better, because there's only one thing on this, let's just say there's only one key result that's really unexpected that I want to talk about that's in the table. And so here's one way that people sometimes will modify this to try and focus on them. They'll put a red box around it, right? So we've still got all these numbers, but this is the one we're really surprised at the number that responded the doctor told me. That was unexpected, right? But the problem with this is this violates Huxley's principle. Every pixel requires cognitive effort. So all those other numbers are just not relevant, other than to impress people that we've measured and analyzed a lot of different variables, right? So a different approach to this, right, is something like this. So start with a blank screen. Say we survey patients, and one of the things we ask them is, how many responded the doctor told me about this issue? And we were really surprised by the result, because only 16% said that the doctor told, right? So this is a whole different way to present this, where you right, and by leaving this off, you actually set it up. You're going to tell you about this. I'm really surprised by this, right? So you're creating a little drama, and how much drama you can create, but then you show them the numbers. They're like, the audience, you know that the audience will be surprised by this, because this is not what was expected. And so this is a way to kind of show them only what's necessary, create a little drama, and keep the presentation engaged. So here's another one that gets also to your question. So let's say this is not my article, but there's a result, there's a picture in this article that I think is really relevant to my presentation for kind of background information. And so I really like this figure A up here. This is really great. And so I just, use a screen capture tool, and I grab this, and I extract this image, and now I've got it. Right, and so I've got, this is on the vertical axis, I've got the cell death, and then I've got this functional TP53 and dysfunctional TP53, and then I've got the PKHD1 and the top side, and we've got, right, these plots, and we've got percentages, and then we've got p-values for comparisons within, and we look like, I don't know, these are interaction results up here, right? So there's a lot going on, and let's say that I want to show this slide, but I also am really interested in the interaction stuff. I just want to show like this versus this. And so one technique is in your presentation software, you just draw white boxes without any borders around them. And if you have a white background on your slide, you can just make it disappear, right? You just place white boxes. And then you associate animations with those white boxes. And then you reveal this figure in the order that you want to tell your story, right? The other thing that's really cool is that if the axes aren't well labeled or they don't look right, you can put white boxes over these, and you can write your own text. So you can make bolded text, you can add color this way, and then just remove the white boxes that you want. And so one of the things that's nice when you're doing graphs is first tell people what you're going to show them. Before you show them the data set, we got cell, explain the axes. We got cell death percentage on the vertical axis, and here we have functional TP53, and we have, right? So you set it up, and then you use this trick, and now we just reveal that as we go, right? We talk about this, and now we've also created a little bit of drama, because what is dysfunctional going to look like, right? And so now we're saying, now we look at this, and now we see this big difference, right? And we can talk about this in terms of this is maybe expected, maybe unexpected, but it's a nice way to layer and show in layers instead of showing the whole thing at once and having people kind of go, that's a lot. And then we can talk about the significance. And then if you notice, again, just leave the white boxes on the rest of the stuff you don't want to show, right? And so it's a way to take an image and control the presentation, control what you show them. And it's a very simple trick. And so show them only what's necessary, prepare them for what you're going to see, and then reveal the data in layers to support your story. Questions? Comments?
So for the review data,
Yeah.
The example we show that the doctor, how they,
Yeah.
what if the audience is curious about the added data? If you
That's
actually show that.
Fantastic question. So one of this is something that, so depending on the kind of talk you're giving, sometimes it's nice to leave out some obvious details, because that will give you, that sets, because you know you're going to ask about that in the question and answer period. And question and answer we'll talk about in a minute, that can be really nerve-wracking, particularly if there's more senior people in the room. So sometimes it's nice to leave out some details that you know people will ask about, but be prepared. And so one of the things you often can do is have supplementary slides that have more detail about that particular result. And so when people ask those questions, you can put up those slides because they're in the supplementary slides of your slide deck, right? And so that's one possible way to do that, is to anticipate the questions and then make sure that you have additional slides. They could either be hidden slides or they could be at the end of the deck.
Yeah, that's really helpful. But should I respond to the audience plus another supplement slide? Would that be very distracting?
Well, so there's a couple ways to handle that. I mean, it depends on the context. If you can say that you have a supplementary slide, and when you get to the question and answer, say, just ask them, if you wait for a couple slides, I'll bring that slide up and I'll come back to that question, right? So it kind of depends on, you just have to judge the situation. You could switch and go to that slide to address it, or you could acknowledge the question and say, if you give me a few minutes, I'll show a supplementary slide that addresses that question. Other comments? It's a great question.
I will say conferences that when your presentation is over, they shut off your slides for the question and answer. So you also have to be prepared if you're speaking at a conference that you might not have the slides. So it's good to make supplementary slides, but always be prepared that they might not be available.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that I'll talk about in giving your presentation, is it's really important to ask what's going to happen in the session that you're giving a presentation in, and say, when are the questions? Are they should I have questions while I give my presentation, or will they hold them to the end? Who's going to run the slides? Will my slides stay up at the end, right? So that's a really great point. It's really helpful if you're at a conference to ask some questions about what's going to happen, right? How's it going to run? Because those details can be really, really important. All right. And so giving your presentation, right? And so let's just cover a couple of things. We're doing really good on time. Preparation, speaking tips, and handling questions. And so in terms of presentation, just a couple of things. If you are giving a research talk online, it's worthwhile to make sure that your audio is really good, because that is one of the primary things. There's a series of, there's some centers around Duke that have like weekly research talks, and I was at one this year where somebody was trying to present from a clinic computer in the middle of a clinic with a really, a microphone that really was really distorted. It's a terrible microphone, and there was people talking in the background, and this person's trying to give a presentation, and you could barely hear what they were saying. It was really unfortunate. And so, if you are in a situation where you're giving important talks online, either borrow or invest in a decent microphone. I think that's really important. And as somebody who teaches online, making sure the audio is crisp and clear and easy to understand is really important. Things like a Samson Meteor or Blue Yeti microphone, those are nice USB microphones that are relatively not that expensive when you buy them on sale. Really helpful to have that. The other thing is, as I mentioned earlier, is really important. Plan realistically for time. Communicate with whoever's the host of what you're doing to make sure you understand what the expectations are with regard to time. Expectations about, should I stop for, I've got a 45 or 15-minute talk. Do the questions come at the end of the 15 minutes, or should I stop after 10 minutes and have 5 minutes of questions? So it's really good to know what the expectations are. The other thing that's really important is that a lot of the professional meetings, you'll be part of a session on related talks, and you may have 4 or 5 people that are presenting. And one of the things that always, right, so what they do is what do they call it, Lauren? Like the chairperson, I guess, at JFM, they'll sit in the front row and they'll hold up a little piece of paper that says 5, 2, and 1, which is counting down your time. And people don't pay attention to that person. And so a lot of times, and also because people have not practiced their talks, they will go over. And what happens in a 4 or 5 person session is, if you're a later speaker, the time is just whittled away because every single one before you went over their time. And so you can be a little defensive, right? And so when I talked earlier about this bullet heavy slides, by not having bullet heavy slides, what you are able to do is, if your time has been cut down, you can adjust what you say about a slide. It's really hard to whip through a slide if you've got like 10 bullets full of text on the slide. But if you've been judicious in what your visual supports are, that allows you some flexibility if time is short. And so just be aware that if you're in a session with multiple speakers, I was at a conference in Beijing, and I thought this was cool. It was huge speaking venue with these giant screens, and above each screen they had an actual like red numbered digital countdown timer. So every speaker, everybody knew when the speaker was out of time, and I thought, this is such an awesome idea. We should do this in the States. And of course, the timers clicked down to 0. Do you think anybody stopped talking? No, they just went right on ahead. The time's out, and they just keep talking. And I'm like, okay, well, nice idea, but people have a really hard time. So just be aware that, plan realistically for time, and be aware if you're in a session, you may run out. You may get a shorter time if people are going over. The other thing, so knowing what to say, like when you give a presentation, there are a couple, particularly like a 10 or 15 minute scientific presentation, a couple options. You can memorize your talk. In a 15-minute scientific presentation, that's probably your best option, is to practice your talk and know what you're going to say and then say it. Another thing is you can print out presenter notes, right? And then you can have those with you up the podium. And the third thing, which you can do, which can be a little challenging, this is easier when you're presenting online, is have like an iPad or a separate device where you're actually, you guys know like presentation mode where it has the slide and it has text, so you actually make speaker notes. This is really hard to do on conference computers because you usually have to customize like the presentation software to get that view. But if you are online, you can have presenter mode on a different screen or a different device. I do this a lot when I'm giving presentations from home or from my office. And then practice. This is really important. And you know, now that we all have Zoom access, it's really easy to start a video meeting and just record yourself giving a talk and then watch yourself. And the other thing you can do is send it out to some people, mentors, colleagues, fellow students, to say, hey, could you watch this and give you some feedback? Back in the day, before Zoom, I used to work in a research center across the street at the VA. We would have lunches. Everybody would bring their lunch to the conference room, and all the fellows that were getting ready to go present at a conference would give their presentations while we ate lunch, and we'd all get them advice and feedback. And this was a required thing that everybody did. And I think folks still do this, but this is a nice modern version, is to record yourself and then send it to somebody you trust and get some feedback from. And this is more for talks when you're invited to give a talk or giving a talk at a conference. It's really important to know who's controlling the slide advancement. I don't know if like what are the Friday DCRI talks? They're the I forget the name of the network, but they have talks every Friday and nobody controls their slides, right? So while they're speaking online, they'll say next slide, right? So it's important to know. The other thing is, if you're in a situation, so I like to put builds on my slides like I showed earlier so that your screen, like you show one bullet, then the next, and the next. That's really hard to do if somebody else is controlling the slides. Because if I have four builds, like spacebar builds on one slide, then I have to say, advance the slide. Like 4 times before we go to the next slide. And that doesn't work. So if somebody else is controlling your slides, get rid of all the builds. I mean, it makes it a little more challenging. But the other way to do like that figure reveal, if you're not controlling your slides, is instead of using the white boxes, put subsequent slides so that they advance the slide to a new slide and you do the build that way instead of all the builds on one slide. If you're on a conference, make sure that your slide animations work. Sometimes the software versions are different and you get some weird stuff at conferences. Figure out again, like what are the windows going to look like, all those technical things. How are the questions going to be shared, stuff like that. If you're on Zoom, is somebody else monitoring chat? Zoom has this really annoying thing of when you're speaking and putting you into speaker mode, which makes the chat window go floating away somewhere so that it's not easy to see questions. All right, so that's some preparation. So in terms of speaking tips, pre-talk jitters are really normal, and what we try and tell people, it's really interesting. There are really famous celebrities that get jitters really bad before they perform. And if you listen to those people talk about that, they say they reinterpret that jitters as my body preparing to present, right? So you just harness that nervous energy. It's good that you have some jitters because you probably are giving an important presentation and you should be a little bit nervous and make sure you're prepared. The master, rehearse a strong beginning, right? It's really important. Don't start with jokes. We don't recommend that. But it is, particularly if you're nervous, it's important to know how you're going to start your presentation. That just gets you off on the right foot. The other thing is to breathe and be comfortable with pauses. I do this sometimes. We tend to talk faster when we're in front of people, when we're a little nervous, particularly if you're engaging the audience with questions. If you ask a question, you've got to give people enough time to process the question, think about the answer, think about whether they want to say something, and then say it. And particularly on Zoom, if everybody's on mute and you're asking for audience response, they got to find the mute button on their, right? And so you need to chill a little bit when you're engaging with the audience. The other thing that's really interesting that goes back to the figure question you said, when we say teacher talk, usually when you're working on a scientific project that's yours or you're part of the team, there's, right, these scientific projects are really complex. And what happens is as we get deep into our science, we forget that other people won't understand a lot of what we're talking about because we're kind of immersed in it. And so this is really important when you're giving a complex scientific talk in person. You're watching people to make sure they're following you. So sometimes if you're getting into real deep territory, you may see people start to glaze over. And when we say teacher talk, that's when you step back and you maybe come back at a particular concept from a different perspective to try and help your audience along. So if you notice you're losing people, and you can anticipate this as well, where you know the most complicated parts of your talk are, think about explaining it maybe in one or two different ways. Also, it's nice if you can keep track of time. I'm watching the clock on the back wall. It's really good to know where you are in time so you can adjust your presentation as you need. And lastly, this goes back to what Lauren was saying. What to put on your screen during Q&A. So the Q&A can be a really important, stimulating part of a talk, right? Because you just told your story to people, and they're going to have questions. They may challenge some of what you said, right? And so one thing you can do, one is if you're on Zoom, stop sharing your screen. So they now see you instead of your presentation. That's one option. The other thing you can do, which is I think is a really interesting idea, is put a summary slide of your whole presentation and focus on the 3 key points or whatever the key points were, is put those up at the very end to stimulate questions, right? Remind people what were the key points of your presentation. And you can put that up and that can actually stimulate discussion. Right, so you can do something like this where you just have the 3 main ideas up on the slide, and then you're also kind of directing people to the parts that are interesting that you could talk about. Really important, I see people not do this a lot, is that whether you're in person or online, restate people's questions, rephrase them, so that everybody knows what the question is. It's also okay, sometimes you get questions, I either don't hear them or I don't understand what they're asking. And it's okay to ask people to rephrase the question. Just say, I'm not sure I fully got or fully understood your question. Could you rephrase that for me? It's also okay to say you don't know the answer to the question, right? Because they'll say, did you look at blah, blah? You're like, no, we didn't look at blah, blah. But that's a really good thing, and that's something we could look at, right? That's a really good question. Sometimes people ask just random questions that have nothing to do with your presentation, which is really weird, but it happens. And if it's beyond the scope of what you want to talk about or what your presentation is, it's fine to say, that's a really interesting question. I'd be happy to talk with you after or discuss that by email, and just move on. And so the key principles, right? Choose and tell a good story. Tell it as simply as possible. Just keep the key points that are needed to tell the story. Create visuals that engage and focus the audience on the key points. And then prepare yourself both psychologically and technologically, right? So that you're emotionally prepared to give the presentation and that you have the right tools.
You guys have a question.
Yeah.
The reason that you don't have bullets, is it just because it takes up space that's not necessary?
Yeah, so I think I think bullets are overused myself. I mean, sometimes I'll use them more, but when, on a slide like this, I feel like it's pretty clear. The fonts are large, the points are fairly distinct, there's not a lot, and so I just didn't think there needed to be bullets here, right? But that's just a personal preference. I also, when I use bullets, sometimes I like to use, in various software, you can also change what the bullet is. So sometimes I hate that And so those are the core principles, I think, of giving effective presentations and giving engaging presentations. Right.
So, when you want to give a kind of presentation, is it reasonable for us to know who our audience are? Like maybe discipline or like generally who our type of audience are?
To know who they are, I mean hopefully that you can find out who the audience is. But this is really difficult because I've given presentations where I really misjudge my audience. For example, I was asked to, there's a community network of churches, and I was asked to come give a presentation about behavioral interventions, and I totally, what was really interesting is they were really engaged with parts of the presentations that I didn't anticipate. Right, and so from a community perspective, they wanted to know about the patients, the participants' experience. They were much less interested in the study design and how, right? They didn't, I was really unprepared for that because I didn't understand who I was talking to. The other thing that's really been a problem is like clinical researchers, like physicians. They're much more interested, they're less interested in the statistics, and they're more interested in study design and in, right? And so as a statistician, when I did my PhD, like the data, I did a classical statistical degree. Nobody cares about the data. The data exists to demonstrate the method, right? And they were always asking, well, what is this data? I just didn't anticipate. I'm like, nobody cares about the data. But of course, here, the data is everything because it's people, right? And it's like those data points are telling the story of those people and of that research. And if you're miscalibrated on that, then that can really lead to some kind of dissonance with your audience if you're not understanding what's of interest to them. So that's really challenging. But to the degree possible, I think that's in advance of giving a talk, it's really helpful to know who's in the room and try and understand what their motivations and interests are. And so, I make it a practice when I can to do some research on who I'm going to be talking to and try and find out who they are, what their interests are, what their research interests are. I think it's really important.
Curious, what do you do when you're so nervous? You just want to get through the, let's care about.
Yeah. So if you're very nervous and you have to give a presentation and you have a lot of anxiety, I think what I do in that situation, because that happens to me too, practice. And then, so, in that situation, you just want to have it cool. So that if you're body sweats and anxiety, it doesn't matter because you practice to the degree that you just deliver, right? And to me, that's the best way is to, if you're nervous, is prepare as much as you can to kind of avoid a situation where you're unsure about what you're supposed to do. So I think practice to me is the best way to deal with anxiety.
About choosing story to tell.
Yeah.
Because sometimes our work is based on the previous papers, or there's just a very broad research question. There's no story, and the research question is the one that is important.
Yeah.
How broad should I choose the story?
Well, and that's a good question. I think sometimes the story is really clear, right? You know what is the story so it's less. In those situations, I think it's less choosing the story and more trying to figure out how to make the story that you have to tell engaging. Right? And so it's more about figuring out how to tell the story rather than choosing the story, how to tell it in a way that is intuitive, engaging, and makes sense. And I actually, this more lately, I think this is a great use of tools like ChatGPT, the brainstorm. Say, hey, I'm giving this presentation. Here's the research question. I've got 10 minutes to talk. How do I make this engaging? You know, and you don't have problems with hallucination when you're asking that, but you just, it can sometimes, it doesn't always have good ideas, but occasionally it'll say one or two things that I hadn't thought about. Good idea. But also talking to mentors or other people. But I think that's really challenging. Sometimes, you know, I mean, I teach stats to physicians. There's stuff that we do, there is no way to make it interesting. Like Fisher's exact test, that is not interesting to anybody, but people like us maybe, right? And so I just think it's really challenging sometimes. But I think still the effort to try and make it interesting, I think, still has payoff associated with it. But,
So, with your audience and deciding what they care about, how do you gauge what level of understanding the audience, or do you say, okay, the people I'm presenting to, if they're all online, so how do you gauge, okay, they're going to be a bunch of people who, if not with the research that you're doing, if they don't know that well, but they're at least are in the science field, so you kind of know how science works, how that sort of stuff works, or is it just make your common lady? Who do you think?
Lauren, what's your answer to that question?
How do you know that the level of audience? I mean, if you're presenting at a conference, you kind of know who the attendees of the conference are, right? I think, I mean, like if you're presenting to this group, you kind of know different people's backgrounds. So I think it just depends. Like you said, you were presenting to community members once. You didn't really.
I'd never presented to community members like that before, so
yeah.
I just had I was just so clueless. But I will not make that mistake.
Yeah, and I guess how would you have done, like going back?
Well, going back, I didn't do my homework. The person who invited me, I didn't ask enough questions about who's in the audience. And the thing was, in that particular situation, there were like ministers, community members, there were some people from DCI there. I mean, it was a really mixed audience, but the core audience was this community advisory group. And I just failed to ask enough questions. And I learned my lesson.
Yeah, so I guess that would be the key, is to ask questions.
I mean, you know, what you make me think of is, so B&B has been hiring a lot of faculty over the last 4 years, and some of the talks are in person, a lot of them are virtual, but our department is now huge, and we have a lot of the faculty positions we've hired for our partner between B&B and other departments, and so you have a really heterogeneous audience, and I think you see the speakers sometimes, they're struggling a little because you've got a whole slew of people. You've got clinicians, you've got statistical faculty, you've got people that are doing like machine learning, AI, they may be from science or biochemistry. And so they've got this really kind of wide range of people in the audience, and it's really fascinating to see how they address that, right? And people do it different ways. And like I said, the other thing is, if you're unsure, I think you err on the side of assuming that you don't have a super sophisticated audience and don't lose them until the last 5 minutes.
Because, I mean, even with Dr. Fauci, I mean, the way he presented, I'm sure most of the people in the audience were faculty or people who were
exactly. But there were probably community people there. That was a very wide audience, and I don't know for you. I don't know what your background is, but I did follow some, right? When he got into like the details, some of the more molecular genetic stuff, I didn't follow that because I'm a classical classical trained kind of behavioral person. You know, I don't do that kind of research. And so, but I feel like he did it in a way that I didn't feel like I was lost, right? He was framing his conversations, and I knew he was talking about some real basic sciencey kind of stuff. And then he went on but I felt he did a really good job. But that's an issue. I think that's something really to think about a lot when you're giving presentations.
Yeah, and I think on the flip side, like when I have been inviting speakers to come talk to you guys, I explain who you are, like I explain the audience to them, so they cater their presentation to what would be appropriate and helpful for you. So I'm sure when I emailed you a couple months ago to invite you to this, I said, we have this group of students, you know, they're doing this for the summer, and I knew I've seen your talk this on YouTube, but I knew that it would be appropriate, but it's good to tell the speaker, you know, it's so if you're invited to speak and not told, you should then go and ask questions.
But I like this talk. There are several different versions of this talk that are intended for different audiences and different lengths, right? And so we, you know, it was really, I knew who I was talking to. So, of course, this is not a little bit different.
I have one question about like moving around. So at a conference, you definitely want to stand by the microphone,
Yeah.
especially if you're in a large room. But in a situation like this, when do you think it's good to walk around and when can it be distracting?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, you may have noticed I wear hearing aids and I have trouble hearing, and that's a lot of times why I walk up close to people is so I can make sure I hear what they're saying. But that's a really important point, and I don't know if Jim is doing video of this or in which camera. I didn't ask him.
You know,
yeah, but Jim and I have been working together for a long time, so I'm sure he's got it covered. But it's really important. Those are other good questions. I'll never forget, Kevin and I were presenting at a dentistry faculty retreat in Indiana, and we're in this big hall, and they had one microphone that was wireless, and the other was on a cord that was like 7 feet long, like attached to something. And so we did rock, paper, scissors, and I got the one that's 7 feet. So I was like on the tether, and I couldn't go anywhere. But yeah, again, I think it's just knowing where you are. I mean, I'm just moving around, but that's a real problem. I'll never forget. The worst is I was giving at Duke Learning Innovation, like one of their educational conferences. They had the podium set in the very corner of the room, and so I felt like I was like backed into the corner. And but so in every situation, this is what we have a whole slew of pictures of weirdest venues for speaking in. So again, I think it's just asking and knowing, am I going to be on camera? Can I move, or am I going to keep walking off camera? Whether they've got you with a lavalier mic, all those kinds of things can be really important to understand. And again, some talks are more impactful or important than others, right? If it's a job talk or a big scientific talk, you want to make sure that you're asking all those questions and try and, make sure you're not doing something that's going to cause problems for folks. You guys have been great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. What are you guys doing for the rest of the day? Do you have more stuff after this? Yeah.
Yes,
Co-pilot.
Yeah.
Oh, you're doing a Copilot session?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you guys all use Copilot? No?
Another way. I think we're doing some quickly.
Who's giving a Copilot presentation? Pardon?
I don't have anything for them, but I'm just gonna do a demo. Have you been using it a lot?
Oh yeah, I use it every day.
Maybe you should.
finally, OIT now has a Copilot page, like telling you how to sign in, and you just do OIT Copilot, you'll find it.
Okay.
That's really helpful.
Yeah,
Now I'm sending that to everybody.
Walk through,
Yeah, but the nice thing about Copilot versus Chat, of course, Copilot's using ChatGPT, but as the model, but is that it's when you sign in with your NetID, it's a protected environment, and so you can put. You're not supposed to put PHI in there, but you can put sensitive corporate data in there, and it's all in a protected enclave, which is not the case necessarily with ChatGPT.
Yeah, I thought it was good to do a little demo.
Oh, that's awesome.
Some people have used it and stuff happen. There's a LinkedIn Learning course that's like half an hour or something that is also good for getting started, but obviously not like domain specific, but yeah, it gives some tips and tricks.
Yeah, there's also some courses from a computer science guy at Vanderbilt who's got now like 5 courses on it's the Duke course. It's on Coursera, but if you go through Duke's Coursera, they're all free. And they're all like, prompt engineering and something like that. They're a little outdated now, but
yeah, it's changing so quickly, right?
Week by week.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Sure.
Hopefully you'll come back every year if
Happy.
we force you to come in. Okay, why don't we take 5 minutes and then reconvene. Copilot is a Microsoft program that runs ChatGPT. So it's like ChatGPT, but it's Microsoft version of it. So if you go to copilot.microsoft.com, let me make sure this is the right way to do it. You'll want to sign in because that will get you to the Duke instance. So you want to sign in with a work or school account. And then I'm going to do my NetID at duke.edu. So when you put this in, it will recognize that you're a Duke account and it will bring you to the Duke login page. Okay, so then I have to. So now, can you see that it says protected up here on the right? That's because I'm in the Duke instance of Copilot. And from my understanding, what happens is it's learning on people's answers and people's questions and answers within the Duke system. So I just want to reiterate, no PHI, no data gets put into here still, okay? Because it's not protected to that level. As I said, it's learning. So what I heard from someone is that if you put in patient data, it can learn from it and then spit it out to someone else. So don't put data in. Ravana.
I was already signed in and I went to Google Copilot, and so Microsoft Copilot, and it doesn't have the Duke protected thing for it.
Did you sign in the way I just did?
I was already, when I opened Copilot, I was already signed in.
To your Duke account?
I think it's just because I'm signed in.
On another website, but you see like in the top right, you see your NetID.
Yeah, but it doesn't take your check.
Yeah. That's how it works for me. So I just want to encourage you all to use Copilot this summer to expedite your work or to help answer questions. It's a really powerful tool. Remember, it's artificial intelligence and it's not a human, so it's not always right. Additionally, if you ask it to write things, it sounds like it was written by a robot. So depending on the context, it can be okay, but if I use it to write something, I always modify it and make it so I feel comfortable claiming that I wrote that. So again, like it writes, if you ask it to write an email for you, it's way longer and more verbose than I would ever write. So I end up like deleting things, making it sound less like a robot wrote it. But it's really helpful for a lot of different things. As I mentioned, there's a training on LinkedIn Learning that's like a half an hour or something. If you want to watch that gives some examples and some use cases and explains some of the functions. Another, you have, by signing in through Duke, you have a little bit of added functionality as well. I don't know if you're not signed in, for example, you can upload images or add documents. So you could maybe I haven't tried this, but maybe you could upload a PDF of a manuscript and ask it to summarize that manuscript or highlight the key points or something. You could just play around with it and see how it works, but it's very helpful for. I thought, let me try. Where do I find a PDF? Let me just go to PubMed. Maybe it didn't work for PDF.
I think it works best.
It only works for images.
Only for images?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So maybe not yet. I thought we had done that at some point.
I think you can still analyze, but you have to analyze from the browser.
Yeah, so I could copy and paste in this. I used to be really polite to it, please and thank you, but then I was like, why am I being polite to my computer, you know?
I think it's funny to see the responses it gives.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see how it does. So I often use it as a glorified search engine, right? It summarizes things that you would get out of a search engine. But it looks like it did pretty well on this. I just asked it to summarize the main points of this article. Also, this is a cool example. So I'm going to do the other thing I want to point out is when you're signed in, you have up to 30. You can ask 30 follow-up questions, up to 30 follow-up questions on the same topic. If you're not signed in, I think it's limited to 5 or 10. Asking 30 questions on the same topic is a lot, but so I'm going to start a new topic now. Okay, so and also if you have typos, it doesn't care. Okay, so I'm asking it to explain the difference between linear and logistic regression and to organize the answer in a table.
does the link of the article need to come from Duke?
No, you can put any link in there.
I tried this and it tells me, I'm sorry, but I can't access external databases or websites that I can summarize specifically.
Yeah, so the link I gave it was to the link of the PDF, and I might have been able to access this because I'm on Duke's network. So it doesn't have like it doesn't have rights to proprietary information. Like it can't get into databases on its own, but if you provide it within that database, I think it should be able to do it. So I think it does this pretty well. You know, it has a nice table of response variable type, the equation, the method to fit the equation, and the output. So I think this is fairly straightforward, but you can do a follow-up question and say, explain this to me like I'm in high school. So you can tell it to alter the responses, and so this will alter the answer, just break it down a little further. It's having a moment thinking. Seems like it didn't really finish. Right? It only did linear regression. So I don't really know what happened here. Maybe I have to. It's not perfect, you know. So I often ask it to help me write code for making plots in R. Something that I would Google, but like it will often pull it up faster than if I were to use Google and click around. So the thing is, like, the more detailed the prompt you give it, the better the answer. And I just don't have like a great, I'm not super prepared, but I'll just say something like, fine, say, so I probably should have done new conversation, but I think it'll know that we've moved on. So write the R code to make a scatter plot with the line of best fit overlaid on the scatter plot. See how it does. And I hope it's going to give me a GD plot with layers. It will, yeah, we'll give you some fake data, and then create the scatter plot, add the line of best fit. So it gives you two methods here. It gives you the base R method and the GD2 plot method. And then I can say, add a title and axis labels. So that's pretty cool. I mean, I've also pasted in our code to here before and said like, ask it to like modify, or how would I add, a title to this plot or something.
I think some of the you can use it to like comment your code.
Yeah, I haven't done that, but definitely try. And this, you could copy and paste this and copy this and paste it into R. Also really helpful for phrasing email addresses or editing text. So actually another thing, let's see how it does with this. I actually used Copilot to make this this table because I wanted the dates from like the Monday through Friday. Excel wouldn't do that with the rate, and then I wanted the Wednesday of the date in the next column, and then I think I had it make like the first three columns. So I basically described what I wanted and made me this table, and then I filled it in with the rest of the information. Any opportunity to avoid Excel. But let's see how it does with this. And I think it won't do great because there's not a lot of information, but let's see what it does. So it's making some stuff up here. Yeah, so it made up your schedule for next week, which we won't follow, but let's see if it even, it didn't even get the Wednesday, right? But that wasn't a good example, but you can see that like this, at least this text is good. You know, you can take some of that text, but if you give it like a really specific prompt about, like, okay, for example, my friend once used it to write an email to fire her cleaning people because, you know, she said it saved her a lot of time on like how to phrase things, and it gave her a template, and then she modified that and sent it. So you can do something similar, like if there's any issues in your internship and you want to like contact your quantitative mentor or me, you know, you can use it to help in writing emails. Does anyone have any other like uses that they commonly use? Mm-hmm.
Just like copy.
Or
Even if like my code is really long, doing things, I'll ask it.
Okay. Yeah.
Even just how to write some code. Especially if I'm not familiar with the model, I need to.
You're like using which method to use, or which?
Yeah, I mean, for example, if I need to use a new model,
Uh-huh.
I'll ask the ChatGPT like, could you provide me an example of this model in R?
Yeah, I've also asked it like how to help interpreting results. You can tell it like, you know, I have estimates from this type of model. How would I interpret these results? So that's helpful.
Yeah, I certainly have done maybe before ChatGPT search the Google. Like we can just ChatGPT.
Right. Yeah. So it basically just uses everything that's on the internet and summarizes the information for you.
Can it change like codes? Like someone that is more familiar with MATLAB, but as an R code, can that person take the R code and have the version of MATLAB?
Yeah, I think I've tried this before, going back and forth between like SAS and R, or R, one way or the other. And it's hard to put in like a whole script, but you can usually put in like one function or command, I think. But try it out. I mean, definitely check it. You know, you don't want to assume that everything it says is true, because it does not perfect and it makes mistakes. And it usually will provide some sources or references at the bottom. So sometimes if there's something really wild, I'll click that and trace it back and see where it got that from. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure everyone's like aware of some of the functions. Again, that the LinkedIn Learning course goes a little bit more into this and has some examples. Of course, they're not like statistics or quantitative specific, but is a good place to start if you want to learn some of the tips and tricks. So, any other questions on this?
So I comment that want to analyze documents, use that, and it's like integrated into the.
Right. Okay. Yeah. You know, actually, I probably should have showed you that way because yeah. So Microsoft Edge does have Copilot built in because they're a Microsoft product. Where I was on Google Chrome, just out of habit. But if you press that button at the top, that's Copilot. That's the logo for Copilot. And I think you can sign in here too, as I did. And this, so you're saying this has more functions? This has more options than if you do it in Google? Minan, this has more options?
Yeah, I think. Me to the file
Okay.
shared.
Do Macs have Microsoft Edge? Okay. Yeah, so I think they're, looks pretty similar. Huh? I didn't see this in the Google version where you can compose like here a paragraph, email, bullet points, LinkedIn post, summary, report. You can choose the length and then you can choose the tone. So that's, I think, an added feature if you use it in Edge. I think you can
like open a PDF file on.
Oh, okay. Okay, let's try that. So this is like the chat, so it knows that I'm on, like the website is linked.
The way I did it is I just have it on my local computer and then I open it with my.
Oh, okay. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and then you have a prompt to generate page 3.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think it knows that, like, okay. There's a way to do it. And then you can, change the conversation style up here too. So this might have some added functions that aren't available if you're using it on a different browser. So I was in Google Chrome before, signed into copilot.microsoft.com, but I see some additional features. Yeah, I see when, like, I have this compose tab when I'm in Edge that I don't have on Google Chrome. Okay, so I think that it was a fun day already, the holidays was pretty off. So we have lunch now, which is out there and available. And after lunch, I'll be around for Lucas and I are meeting at 2, but I'll be around from 1 to 3. If you have questions or issues, you can come talk to me. I think so we have like a recurring meeting, right, at 2, or meeting with your quantitative mentor, so, yeah.
Yeah, or then just like come back later,
Yeah,
just meet.
yeah, I encourage you to like stay and work together and collaborate and create some community, but you are also, you don't have to be here. I think it's just nice if people are kind of working together. You only do that one day a week. If you were in like an office setting, you would be together every day and everyone working alongside each other. But times have changed. The other thing is, has anyone used the office space here at all?
Yes.
Okay. Did you use an office or do you need it? Okay. It's nicer to have windows there, but if you want like privacy or anything.
If I need to have a meeting.
Yeah, yeah. And would it be, I asked about this at one point and I didn't pursue it again, but like if the offices have monitors in them, would people use them? Would it encourage you to come in or work here? Monitors that you could plug your computer into?
Honestly, it's annoying enough to commute together unless I have to. And I'm already here to work for
Okay. Would anyone use them?
I would use them if there's two, because I have one monitor at home, and I think sometimes it's easier to just have a backup iPad sometimes.
Okay.
That's easier.
Anyone else?
But I'll be here often enough because my PR wants to be in person all the time.
He does on other days. Okay.
So
Personally, I can't work on my laptop screen. I have to have like 2 monitors. So
I want a monitor and a cable that connects.
okay. Yeah, I'll ask about it because I did ask at one point, but the person who controls it is like out, and then I just never followed up. But I want to make sure that if I pursue this, people are actually using this are there. Not yet, but yeah, I'm gonna ask if there's the possibility to put that system in there.
Social event. This is not related, but it's also funded. I have to say it's not.
Yeah, I would have to ask. Probably not. Yeah.
If I can come to social events if it's on Wednesdays after we're done.
Yeah, you could try that with me. Any other questions, issues? Does Internship capable have monitors in them? Or they're just
Good question. I feel like they might actually.
you never work with them?
I do. I have like 2 or 3 times. I can't remember if there's one. I've just done everything.
Yeah. It's once you go to monitors,
I know.
you can't go.
So nice.
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah.
Switching between tabs gets.
Yeah. And even just like a smaller screen, it's difficult. Okay, but yeah, we'll meet again next Wednesday in person, and you're welcome to come in here or work remotely until then. So enjoy lunch.